I welcome you all to the June 13 meeting of the Arlington Committee 100, where our topic this evening, as you all know, is Crystal City development. What will the future be? We have an exciting program ahead of us. And before I forget again, let me point out that one more member of the county board has arrived, Blvd. Welcome. That same county board approved a 40-year plan for Crystal City. It is the sector plan, taking a look at the development that should be in the future. You've all seen, if you've been here very long, that Arlington was a little farming community, and then it became a suburban community, and then it became a lot of other things. The first major development that I remember was Crystal City, and then Roslyn and Ballston, and etc. Each was a significant major impact, changing the character and the composition of Arlington, mostly all for the good. Each of the developments had its hiccups, lessons learned. As following probably a half a decade of community involvement, planning, detailed discussions, the Arlington way, the new Crystal City development plan was created. It is profound, and we in the Committee 100 thought you would be interested in knowing more about it, because we're all going to be impacted, hopefully, positively by it. The potential is mind-boggling. But I learned after our announcement went out that some of the numerics that we mentioned in the announcements were potential and not likely to occur. And our program tonight is going to have the experts who are going to tell you. Our first speaker is Mitch Bonanno, who is the Senior Vice President of Vornado/Charles E. Smith, one of the developers who's going to be changing the character of Crystal City. And we invite Mitch to the podium.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? So I'm Mitch Bonanno with Vornado Charles E. Smith, and I am here tonight not because I'm with Vornado, but because I was part of the board-appointed Crystal City Task Force. Me, Chris Doral, I see Ted Sachs here as well, and I think 16 of our closest friends were on a task force that helped craft the basis of this plan. And I'm also here because I attended all but 2 of the over 100 meetings, public meetings about this plan over a 5-year period. So I got the Stamina Award, so they asked me to come present tonight. So thank you very much. I appreciate being here. That said, I just want to say Vornado is a public company, so I have to do my little disclosure that if anything I say tonight somehow conflicts with what we've disclosed to the SEC, they are right, and I'm somehow mistaken. So I just want to get that straight. So I'm going to start with a little overview. I also want to mention I am an Arlington resident and live right down the block in Ballston. So I'm going to start with a little overview of Crystal City and then talk about the highlights of the plan. I'm going to go quickly because I want to save time for the panel discussion, which I think will be great. First, I want to ask how many people here have been to Crystal City since 2004 to go shopping, go to the theater, go to a restaurant, something fun? Oh, great. Okay, so it's working. Thank you. So again, this is an old slide of Crystal City back in the day, and some people may remember this. This was the beginnings of Crystal City. And Crystal City really was founded on convenience, location, proximity to National Airport, and it really became one of the original TOD, transportation-oriented development projects or developments in this area when Metro arrived in the 1980s. So here is Crystal City today. quite a bit different than it looked back in that photo. So just some of the basics of Crystal City. The planning area is over 50 buildings, about 11 million square feet of office, 12 hotels, 6,000 residential units, 1 million square feet of retail and restaurants, parks, plazas, lots of activities and fun things to do. We're the home of an award-winning theater, Cinetic Theater, and currently Artomatic is in their second tour in Crystal City, which I encourage everyone to come see. You know, Crystal City, again, is founded on transportation, transit, and convenience. We're at the Metro. We have the Virginia Railway Express. We're right next to National Airport. We have a number of bus lines right next to the Mount Vernon Bike Trail, literally next to 395, 110, and the GW Parkway. There is really no comparable area for transit and transportation in this region. So, and the reason I asked if anyone has been here since 2004, because in 2004 is when Vornado created the new Main Street of Crystal City. I'll show you the picture of what it looked like before. So this was the before picture of Crystal Drive. Literally, there was a parking garage up to the edge of Crystal Drive. This is what that area looks like today, quite a bit different. So Crystal City really has been evolving quite a bit over the last 8 years. So from that to this is another picture of Crystal Drive, just a complete transformation. And that was really driven by some of the tenancy changes in Crystal City with the PTO moving out and some vacant space coming and really having to rethink and reposition Crystal City for the private sector. So also, we 2-wayed a number of streets in Crystal City. 15 years ago, almost all the streets in Crystal City were one-way. So again, not great for an urban dynamic area, so we 2-wayed a number of the streets. Got a lot of great press about this, kind of the coming out of Crystal City. We also created a business improvement district, and Angela Fox, who runs that, is here tonight as well, for programming, activities, really adding a soul to Crystal City. Got great press, and our first major private tenant to come to Crystal City was PBS. Wonderful partner, really started to change the dynamic of Crystal City. And again, other companies followed. Got a number of great companies to move into Crystal City over the last 8 years. Just a shift from almost the pure government sector that it was 15 years ago. So we also repositioned some of the other buildings, older buildings already. This was an office building that the PTO moved out of. We gutted it, reskinned it, added 6 floors, and created a new high-end residential building in Crystal City, and that is up there today. And here's another picture of that at 220 20th Street. And it really just started to change the character of Crystal City. So then we have the Crystal City Sector Plan. That really came about based on the 2005 Base Realignment and Closure Act that recommended moving DoD office space out of private buildings into secure facilities and military bases. So under that, about 3 million square feet in Crystal City was projected to go vacant in 2011. That was back in 2005. That is happening. A number of Army, DoD, Coast Guard folks have moved out of Crystal City, and there is some vacancy. But that announcement is really why a planning process was undertaken, and it was like no other planning process ever conducted in Arlington County. It was done in 3 major phases. First, the task force was appointed that helped come up with the guiding principles for the plan, which were approved by the county board after a work session with them and a number of meetings. Then the full sector plan was approved in 2010. So it really took about 2 years to get from the guiding principles to the sector plan, and that was another probably 30 or 40 meetings under the purview of the long-range planning committee of the Planning Commission. Then after that, in 2011, the actual zoning ordinance for the plan was approved that really makes the sector plan policy and creates an option for rezoning to Crystal City CO. So again, it's a 4 to 5 year process, over 100 meetings. It really takes Crystal City momentum to the next level. It allows what's already started, the transformation of Crystal City, to really continue to more areas in Crystal City. And it's really once in a generation opportunity. When you have a large office building, if it gets renovated in place, if there's a substantial investment in it, it is unlikely that it will ever get redeveloped for 20 or 30 years. Once you put that much capital in a building, you usually will be able to lease it and you want to get a return on it. Under the plan, these buildings were going vacant, some of them in entire buildings, and it really gave an opportunity to look at it and say, do you renovate them or redevelop them? And the sector plan gives owners the opportunity to redevelop. Link mentioned some of the numbers that came out in the announcement. The plan plans for about a 60% increase in density. And again, it does that by balancing the mix of uses in Crystal City. It consolidates office, adds more residential, creates a new transit way, and a new framework for development. So this is the density numbers, and we'll probably talk about this more in the panel. But as you can see, it's about a 15 million square foot potential increase through 2050. So it's not the 90 million that came out in the announcement. Not sure where that number came from. About 15 million potential. So again, I mentioned the transit way that's created under the plan and the funding structure for it. So again, Crystal City today, and this is what Crystal City could be under the sector plan by 2050. Represents about a 60% increase, very well planned for, a lot of meetings, a lot of time into it. And just to close on, we are a substantial stake owner in Crystal City today. We are vested and invested in the community. This is really a partnership between everybody to keep the momentum of Crystal moving forward and ensure its vibrancy for the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's kind of the introduction. And our next speaker is Terry Holzheimer, Dr. Terry Holzheimer, who's the Director of Economic Development for Arlington County. And we were very pleased to have him here not too long ago, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. And he's a fountain of knowledge of what is going on in the county and what should be. Please welcome Terry to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening. I think Mitch, speaking here. Okay, I can do that. Mitch set it up pretty well in terms of why we did the plan, which was BRAC, which was pretty serious. We describe BRAC as serious but manageable. We are faced with losing 17,000 jobs and about 4.2 million square feet of office space, the equivalent of losing 5 military bases in the smallest county in America. That is a fairly substantial impact, and so that caused us to take a look at the plan. What I want to start with is what we actually showed to the Planning Commission and the task force as we went through the process, because the paper that we were asked to write, my paper is, we are getting what we planned when we planned for it. And I always talk about Arlington as we have to plan very carefully because we're going to get what we plan. And so what was that? And this doesn't show up particularly well, but we have the plan envisioned about almost 40 million square feet of space at build-out. Now that is 40 years. That's quite some period of time. And we looked at the time frame of probably having 35 new buildings in 30 years. So if you think about it as roughly a new building a year, that's about the pace of change that we expected as we did the plan. So it is an increase, but contrary to one of the little provocative comments, teasers in the program, we actually did all of the planning for transit and transportation and EMS and retail and fire and everything else during this process. And so it all worked. And that was the beauty of the plan, is that it all worked. So what's it mean in terms of people, residents and all? We're going to go from about 13,000 existing residents to about almost 40,000 residents and employees as we go through the process. No, that's wrong. We got 13,000 now. We're going to 27. We've got 40,000 employees and going to about 60. So this is our biggest business district, but it is also a substantial residential area, and will become more substantial residential area as we go through the process. You'll have to excuse me. What shows up on the screen is totally unrelated to what's on my paper. So I hope you, as a matter of fact, so is that. So you're not seeing what I was on the PowerPoint. I apologize for that. But what is our expectation? Well, our expectation was this, especially in terms of office space, is that by 2020, we would have less inventory and less occupied space than we did in 2010. Okay, Crystal City is clearly an area of transition. Okay, and as I said, that transition is going to take some time. It is not happening quickly, but it is happening. Okay, so the plan itself said we are going to lose buildings, we're going to lose occupancy, we're going to see increases in the vacancy rate, sometimes pretty substantially for certain periods of time as we go through this transition period. Mitch and his colleagues in the development community have choices, as he mentioned. They can redevelop a building, which takes a building down and out of service for several years. They can substantially rehabilitate a building, and that takes some time too. It takes a building out of service for a year or so before it gets repositioned. And even if you just refurbish a building, it's out of service for a while. And re-tenanting the buildings is going to be tough. GSA is not backfilling that space by and large. And so finding new tenants, as Vornado did, as PTO left, as early stages of BRAC happened, that takes a while. And there's nobody naturally to step in except the federal government, and federal leasing is totally dead in the water right now. They are not going to step in and backfill any of this space. So we have to find new users for the space. But the plan, what we expected to happen, was that we would not get back to the 2010 level by 2020. We'll talk about the retail a little bit. One of the big questions when we started the plan from a staff standpoint was, do we make developers rebuild the underground, which was a 1960s planning model, or do we do something else? And I think the inclination of the staff and the planners were, why would we recreate a 1960s model that's probably not all that dynamic or necessarily meets today's needs? Except when we went on the original walking tours, I was besieged by people who told me clearly, we love our underground, don't touch it, don't let anything happen to it. And it caused us to do a fair amount of economic research. One of the elements of the Crystal City plan is there's been more economic analysis of Crystal City, of demand in every single aspect of development than in any plan I have ever seen in the entire nation. Okay, we studied literally every aspect of everything. And the retail part shows we had a 1.5 alternative, which was the second alternative before we did the final. But basically, we kind of looked at the different types of retail by frontage. There's space that's totally underground. There's space that's totally external on the edges, and there's space that's a hybrid. You can get to it from behind in the underground and in the front on the street. It's very difficult to understand that kind of topography, if you will, of the space, because Crystal City is a very complex place right now. And so initially we were looking at fairly substantial increases in the space. Again, it's not what I have on my paper. So what we came up with was basically, the plan allows for 1,338,000 square feet of retail space, or retail-like space, and I'll kind of explain what that means. Or that's what we project as the demand, about 1.3, 1.4 million square feet. The plan allows for about 1.7 to 1.8 million square feet. We keep almost all of the existing internal space and build more external accessible space. So new streets, like the new Clark Bell, will actually have stores on each side and be a new retail street. Crystal Drive will remain a retail street. So, you're going to have a really vibrant, exciting, walkable kind of neighborhood. And that was the expectation. And as we look at how demand changes, we're going to have more households buying things, fewer business visitors, not fewer, more, but a smaller percentage. So what people buy is really important to what kind of space you have and how you design it. And so, you know, here's the basic breakdown of what we're going to have. We're going to have some more GAFA, which is general apparel, furniture, and other. Convenience and service is going to increase food and beverage. We're not saying here's what goes in each retail slot. We can't do that, but we have kind of indicated what is needed. And these are a couple of pictures of how is it going, okay? What are we doing? And is any of it working? Well, the answer is, yeah, we're probably about where we thought we were, or better than we thought we were going to be. The building on the left, 1900 Crystal Drive, is in for site plan approval, and hopefully that's a brand new building, a tear down and build a new building that will get done. There's another building on the old post office site that has been in for site plan, so those are 2 new buildings. So then we've got the 1400 Crystal Drive that Lowe is refurbishing, taking down to the skin or past the skin to the structure. And then there's a new Boeing building, which is adjacent to the area. So we are getting what we planned when we planned it at pretty much the pace that we expected it to be. And in order to pay for it, you know, we did get the increment in terms of the tax increment that we had projected that we would get last year and that we will have next year. So we are on target for paying for the infrastructure, and we've already started the infrastructure. We've got $22 million of infrastructure that was awarded within the last 2 months. So again, we are where we said we were going to be. It's happening as we said it was going to happen, and it's pretty much on target. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Now, the Arlington Committee 100 is an organization that tries to present all sides of the issue. So our next speaker is not a developer or a county, but is a resident, Krista Ahl, who has been a very active leader for a number of years, resident of Crystal City, a member of his board of directors, a member of the Crystal City Planning Task Force, and is currently co-chair of the review committee charged to help review the implementation of all of these plans. So to hear the other side of the story, welcome Krista Ahl, and I might caution you that he is from Australia and speaks a little different. So you want to pay attention. Krista.
Well, thank you, Link, but Sweden is quite some distance away from Australia, so I think you got it a little bit confused, but never mind. In any event, I'm glad to be here because you were in a sense referring to the traditional dialogue between developers and county, and it's not always we have a chance to count on this opportunity to turn that into a triangle with the views of the resident community being part of it. And if, with your permission, and before you or someone else puts me on the clock here for the comments that I had prepared for you here, I wanted to link up a little bit with what our previous speakers so nicely have offered here. You know, most of you know Link pretty well, so you wouldn't be surprised to hear that he told me that, well, if we invite you, you have to realize that this is a very serene and cerebral group, so that in no way can we have anything that amounts to tearing the Crystal City plan apart or picking fights with Mitch or something like that. And perhaps that's disappointing to you to hear, but that would not in any event have been my inclination, and I'll try to explain why before I get into my comments. As was explained, the Crystal City planning process that lasted for many years is long since over. Yes, I was part of it and had a number of serious concerns with it at the time and still have, but this is not the time or place to rehash that. And of course, the plan, as was indicated, is in place since late 2010. And that's what we have to live with and work with. So both I myself and neighbors in Crystal City for sure disagree with one aspect or the other, and so on. But second guessing that is also not the topic for tonight. On the contrary, I think some, like Mary Hines and others, might confirm that in the tail end of the Crystal City planning process, I was probably the one who was trying to urge people on and saying, enough talk, enough agonizing and speculating. We really need to get on with it, because the real proof of the pudding is in the implementation. And of course, that fits in very nicely with what Link commented, that the board went ahead and introduced something that is unique in Arlington, namely a specific entity responsible for the monitoring and the reviewing of the implementation. But beyond that, and of course that meaning that my comments really will be totally forward-looking rather than backward-looking, I think it's clear that all the three of us, even though we will look at things from totally different vantage points, I think what we do have in common is absolutely one thing. We want this Crystal City plan to succeed. So it's in that spirit that I will be offering my comments. And now if you have the clock ready, now I'm up to where I had intended to start.
Okay, now you got 2 minutes.
All right. Can I get Angie up here to speak on my behalf? She's the best speed talker I know. Well, one thing that one needs to appreciate is that a 40-year plan makes it more difficult for people to grapple with it and understand it. I'm creating havoc with, okay.
Yeah, go ahead and talk.
All right. So if some people in Crystal City are a bit overwhelmed and worried about this plan, sometimes one discovers that that's because it hasn't quite sunk in, that this won't happen overnight, that it is a 40-year plan. Others, just the opposite, precisely because they know that they will never see the full implementation of the plan. They become a bit cynical or frustrated. And yet others, because of the long-term nature, may become quite indifferent to the whole issue of the plan. But there are some areas, some topics, that when you talk with the neighbors, that they tend to bring up much more frequently than others. And those are the ones that I'm going to try to convey to you. Now, that should not be taken as indications of pessimism or disillusion. It's more a matter of saying that beyond the mere assurances in the forms of word, these are the areas where we really believe and want the county and the developers to really make sure to take measures to ensure that the plan lives up to its promise. And with Link's help, we now have on the screen here what I call, in the spirit of looking forward and being optimist, the keys to success, those 4 areas. The first one, not surprisingly, given a huge increase in population and density, concerns the impact of traffic. At the very outset, it was emphatically stated by the then board chair that for the plan to be successful, any net increase in commuting in and out of Crystal City simply had to be by means other than single occupancy vehicles. And of course, very few want to quarrel with that aspiration. But on the other hand, many doubt or wonder at least what can or will be done to make that aspiration realistic. And I think we all...
Mr. It's very hard to hear you. Could you pull the microphone a little closer to you, please?
Perfect. I think what is clear then is that it will require a major change in mindset and opportunities. Housing situation that will truly allow people to both live and work in the area, so that biking and walking become options, for instance. But clearly, the key is that the transit is going to be what matters if we are going to try to achieve those aspirations I commented on. It's going to be critical both for intra-Arlington commutes and for longer distances. And there perhaps doubts are again expressed that transit really will even with major improvements in existing modes and with the addition of a streetcar, will be the panacea that it will change people's habits and the opportunities that they see. It follows that many are ready to believe that perhaps more drastic measures may become needed to force this kind of reduction in the inflow of cars. And that, for instance, business as usual when it comes to parking spaces and so on simply may not be tenable. In other words, it may turn out that mere encouragement and more alternatives may not be enough to get the result we want, so that a more heavy-handed approach might become necessary. It may be that we need to eventually sell Crystal City or promote Crystal City as a location that simply does not tolerate reliance on cars so much. But the real concerns regarding traffic may not necessarily even be related to the impact of the Crystal City development itself. Instead, the location of Arlington and Crystal City downstream along Route 1 and 395 may eventually become the problem. It would not help the image of Crystal City if a sense emerged that our major access roads and our gateways were prone to gridlock. This is, of course, generally a familiar issue for Arlington to grapple with, but in the community, we have a sense of urgency that the county really embarks on early strategic planning to deal with this issue specifically for Crystal City. The second area involves open space. It should not be surprising if there is a dilemma in this regard, considering the 60% increase in density. Because rather than a commensurate increase in open space, the plan suggests a very minimal increase and only a vague, non-binding promise to try to find more. It's not so much an issue of large spaces for activities, although the planned center park is a key feature, with the only problem that its timing is totally up in the air. Instead, in what might eventually look like a sliver of Manhattan, the focus needs to be on small, convenient spaces spread around the area where workers and residents can get their refuge. Because the reality is that the lunch crowds with their sandwiches or the parents with their toddlers cannot really venture that far. The plan implies that somehow good quality and design of the open spaces may compensate for the lack of quantity and easy access. But we don't think it's likely that in the longer run this will be enough to create a right balance and a sense of an attractive environment. Residents also urge the county to get on with the intended process under which the county would acquire ownership or formal permanent easements for open space. Because the remarkable situation for Crystal City is that the county currently does not own any public open space in Crystal City. The third topic is one that is, of course, not unique to Crystal City, but nevertheless will be significant for the efforts of making Crystal City into a thriving and attractive environment. In a community that is intended to be characterized by the balance between residential and commercial development, it involves creating an environment that stands for a harmonic coexistence and mutual respect. The experience from similar situations, both in Arlington and elsewhere, suggests that such a harmony does not just come by itself in the absence of deliberate efforts by both parts of the community and by the county. It seems to happen instead too easily that the residential side is subordinated to the commercial side whose interests are prioritized. And it must be recognized that different interests do indeed arise, so that the viability depends on this mutual understanding and a readiness to compromise. It seems that the county finds it easier to deal with arrangements and regulations for neighborhoods that are more homogeneous in nature. But the issues within mixed-use communities really do warrant increased attention. For instance, it's not realistic and appropriate to suggest, as has in fact been done, that those who knowingly settle in a mixed community have no right to expect any consideration or protection, and that they should simply be seen as having asked for a 24/7 environment of sound, light, and other environmental impact. The fourth and final area involves the full and multifaceted set of facilities, amenities, and services that would turn a growing Crystal City into what has been described through many labels: a complete community, a pedestrian-friendly neighborhood, or a place to live, work, and play. Already today, residents emphasize the importance of seeing these cliches or slogans turning into realities. They fear that it's far too easy for the county and the developers to turn slow or incomplete progress into some kind of blame game, where also in many instances it would be convenient to blame the market for what is not being accomplished. Personally, I'm more favorably impressed by what has been demonstrated by the county so far in this area. There is already a board decision to establish a formal inventory for community services and amenities in Crystal City. And an initial version has in fact already been drawn up by the Crystal City Citizens Review Council in collaboration with staff. And it covers a broad spectrum: schools and libraries, health and emergency services, social activities and entertainment, and a plethora of different types of retail, of course, with a grocery store at the top of the list. It will be supplemented by benchmarks for many items in this inventory, so that as far as possible, there is an objective triggering mechanism. The progress related to the inventory is to be reviewed by the county in connection with all future site plans in Crystal City. So what remains then is to begin to establish a record of actual implementation in line with the density increases and the population growth. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and like my colleagues, will remain available for questions and comments. And beyond that, I could offer, you will find the email address in the handouts that you will get later, that if you somehow have any questions or comments beyond tonight, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Krister. And I see one hand has been jumping up and down, so we'll start here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gail Dennis. I'm a retiree from the federal government, and I find that paying for parking is somewhat of a disaster financially. Not only in North Arlington, but also in the beautiful buildings and layouts that you presented tonight, which were indeed beautiful. There was no little block for parking, and whether or not people would have to pay for this to come to the stores or the restaurants there.
Okay.
And I wondered if you could address this.
Okay, thank you.
I guess as a public sector person, I probably should be the one to field it. You know, parking as we continue to urbanize and densify is more and more likely to become a paid event. Free parking is less and less likely to be found in Arlington, and certainly less and less likely to be found in the urban villages. It hasn't disappeared entirely. As a matter of fact, there's probably more free parking in Crystal City than any place else in Arlington right now. But I would say the long-term outlook is you can expect to pay for parking if you are going to venture into the urban villages.
And while the next question comes up, is there another comment? Mitch?
I'm happy to add to that as well. Is this on? You know, parking is very expensive to build, especially underground parking. And what we do in Crystal City is, during the day, most of that parking is dedicated to the office tenants and residents, but after 4 o'clock, there are thousands of spaces that open up for free, and that's to help promote retail events and other things on weekends. Actually, there is a website. I can't give you the address off the top of my head, but I think the Crystal City Bids website has a map of all the free parking on it.
The next question, Carolyn in the back. And while the microphone is getting there, each of the speakers has prepared a paper outlining all of the things that they talked about tonight Make sure you pick up a copy when you leave. Caroline.
Has any attention been given
Closer.
Has any attention been given to the need for a better lighting system at the intersection of Highway 1 and 23rd Street?
It's a rather technical question. I mean, we are effectively rebuilding every street in Crystal City. So the answer has to be yes, of course, but I couldn't give you the details of what is likely to happen. But there is a website too, and I don't know the address, but our Department of Environmental Services has every single street improvement on a website along with expected dates of completion of the project. And that's only been up for a couple of weeks now, so it's very current.
And I'll just add to that that is a VDOT controlled intersection. So Route 1, it's a little challenging for the county to actually affect change on. But one of the changes is that the next street over, Clark Street, under the plan, is relocated further away from that intersection into Crystal City to help with the bottleneck that occurs right there at the intersection of Clark, Route 1, and 23rd Street.
Next question.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Scott Pedowitz. It was mentioned during the presentation that for the commercial side, the thought is that private tenants are the most likely area for success versus public. Given the soon-to-be metro accessibility of Fairfax's key commercial corridor, what are the views to ensuring that this is Crystal City and Arlington generally are competitive vis-a-vis that? And I'm curious for both the public and private views on that.
Well, we did the market analysis, so I'll start, and then Mitch can give you the reality, I suppose. We looked at all Class A office space to be built at all metro locations over a 30-year period, which included places like Noma and the ballpark area and Tyson's Corner and Reston. So what was Crystal City's necessary market share in order to be able to have the plan unfold in the time frame that we looked at it, okay? So that considered all market factors of all different types, but primarily said, okay, we're in a different position. We will be in a different position than we have been. We have competition from the east. We never had. We never had price competition from the District of Columbia. There was always a $15 difference between office space in the district in Arlington. That no longer is the case because there's less expensive buildings being built. And then in the district, and Arlington, especially in areas like Roslyn and some of the new Crystal City buildings, will be at the top end of the market. So we're no longer going to have that price advantage that we've had. And Tyson's clearly will be a price advantage to them over Arlington. And so our market position is much more challenging, much more competitive than it has been in the past. We've considered all of that as best you can in a long-term plan. We will always be a better place than Tyson's. You know, Tyson's already has Arlington envy, and 30 years from now we'll be better than, they'll never catch up to us. And so from a competitive environment, from building a good community, it's just going to be no contest. But they will be price competitive, and that's going to affect us a bit.
And I'll add to that by saying that just putting a metro station somewhere in Fairfax does not make it Crystal City. The county had the foresight to locate their metro stations in the hearts of urban areas to make them very walkable, accessible. The vibrancy and urbanity of Crystal City is not matched anywhere in Fairfax County, even Tyson's. And they have a pretty robust redevelopment plan as well for Tyson's Corner. It has its own challenges, but I agree with Terry that Arlington is far ahead of Tyson's and hopefully will remain so.
Cecilia?
Hi, Cecilia Espinoza. You might guess my question is going to revolve around schools. When we talk about the mixed commercial and residential aspect of what this will be, the fact that there's only one elementary school on that side of 395, although there is a middle school situated on that side of the county, is an issue. But how extensively are you working with the schools, and how will we ensure, given the absence of county-owned land in that area, the sufficient schools for this population you're bringing into Crystal City?
Everybody turns to me again. Yeah, when we started the process, we did all the population projections, including household size, number of students, pupils expected to be generated over what period of time, and all of that. And we worked with the school's demographers to figure out what that means for the schools in the catchment area around Crystal City. And at least certainly in the long term, even the midterm, the response that we were given as staff was that there's adequate provision for the students that are going to be generated. Now, long term, I don't know what that situation is, and I suspect that we will have to make adjustments as time goes on. From an economic development standpoint, of course, schools are inherently important, not to mention how the residents feel about them. But you know, one of the good things about Crystal City is the fiscal upside. The upside in terms of taxes to the county is enormous. Only about 30% of the tax increments yielded by the new development and the value added in Crystal City goes into improvements in physical infrastructure. The rest is available to go into the general fund for capital projects and other things like that. The money for the things that we will need is inherently embedded into the plan on the back end of the project. These redevelopment will yield enormous fiscal benefits. But in terms of planning a school 10 years out, I don't know that we're there yet.
Perhaps I could add, I mean, schools, as I said, is obviously one of the items in the inventory of services and facilities. But along the lines of what Terry was saying, it's probably one of the most difficult ones to anticipate, because how far out can we realistically go in more or less speculating about demographics, age composition, family composition, and so on. We know that it's a topic particular concern for our adjacent neighborhoods, where they're worried that their children will be crowded out by masses of Crystal City kids needing space in the schools. But I think it's one of those where we just have to make sure that we are, compared with other services and facilities, well ahead of the game and anticipating, so because of the infrastructure that is needed to come up with more school space.
And I'd just like to add to that also, the way schools are thought of may have to change in a dense urban area. You're not likely to get a 5 or 6 acre site to do a large school with surface parking and big playfields in the center of an urban core. You may have to think about it more of a vertical context, like some other cities do.
Greg Greeley, I had a follow-up question on the schools, which is, I'm sorry. My name is Greg Greeley. I had a follow-up question on the schools, which is, as we're looking at the growth of residents, is it possible to use proffers or public-private partnerships to not necessarily get land, but get the buildings constructed for the additional space we would ultimately need?
I think trying to use the site plan process to get massive new facilities is an unlikely expectation. I think the idea that we have to use the money that is generated by the tax base increases to pay for legitimate public process projects is probably the way that we're going to have to go on that. There may be some opportunities to look at public-private partnerships related to the expansion of a couple schools, because we've been asked to do that. But to get a whole new school out of a proffer or a site plan condition is unlikely, I think. I'm just trying to tell it how I see it here.
Question over here?
This is a question combined with an idea. My name's Brig Perry. I love the foresight and the innovation. It seems to me, however, that you need a hook to get this development to really get ignited, get a catalyst. If you look at Atlanta, it's got the world's largest aquarium. Who knew? Atlanta? Okay, Bernie and Billy Marcus donated $250 million. It's a tremendous economic draw for the city of Atlanta. Paris has an amazing aquarium that just opened a couple years ago that's underground. If you could get a private partnership coupled with some public money and some companies involved to create a great new attraction for people to want to fly to Washington, Crystal City, an aquarium, whether it be above ground or below ground, I think it would be a tremendous draw and help the economic success of that whole area. So it's not just another competing with Tyson's, but actually have a draw that could be educational and scientific at the same time. And I just was hoping to hear your comments on that.
Well, I'm looking to you this time.
No, I mean, I have to say, I've never specifically thought of an aquarium. No, I was at the Camden, New Jersey Aquarium last weekend with my kids, and it's a wonderful place, and we slept on the battleship next door, and it was a great weekend. So, you know, Arlington has a number of drawers, and one in Crystal City is Longbridge Park, and the discussion of a world-class aquatic facility there, not an aquarium, but for people to swim in. I think those things are very important for an area, and we look forward to Longbridge Park expanding and getting fully built out. We have Cinetic Theater in Crystal City. It's one of the great drawers. It's more local than national, but I have to say I have not thought of an aquarium, and I'd like to hear Terry's thoughts on that too.
As we look at you know, major new kinds of draws or facilities, whether it's an aquarium, whether it's a major museum, whether it is some kind of facility that is an extraordinary facility for a community, that tends to come with some level of maturity, okay? When there is a there, it's not the leader unless you're a community that dumps hundreds of millions of dollars into a speculative project that may or may not be successful, and many communities do that. I don't see Arlington as ever kind of likely to do that. But as Crystal City matures, as we have, you know, more of a there, the ability to attract those kinds of amenities grows. We would not have expected an ice complex in Ballston, and until we had a level of development and interest, it would not have happened. So other things could well happen. I couldn't tell you. Economic development tends to be very opportunistic about these kinds of things, in all honesty, and if an opportunity presented itself, we'd probably talk to them about it. But to go out and seek one or build one, I'm not really there.
We have time for 2 more questions. Carrie? And followed by Joan.
Thank you, although I probably could shout. I'm Carrie Johnson, and I was listening for 2 words that usually show up prominently in any discussion of any sector plan in Arlington, which is affordable housing. What is in the plan, and what do you realistically expect will happen so that people of diverse incomes who work in Crystal City can also live there?
I probably should have done the numbers on this because I don't have them off the top of my head. But the premise of the Crystal City plan is there was an agreement that was forged. Carrie, you should be answering these questions, not asking them. Was that there is a formula by which affordable housing contributions or affordable housing provision must be made for all new construction, all new development. And the agreement or the premise of the plan is that on all development that formula will be met in its entirety. It may not be as much affordable housing as people want, but it's as much affordable housing as we agreed to with the private sector years ago in a compromise formula for affordable housing. Above that, if we do ever get into a situation where we can gain more by trading off one thing for affordable housing or another for affordable housing, clearly I think the board has the proclivity to want to do that, especially as people come in and ask for new and better or bigger things. But there's not a provision for substantial public benefits that would trigger any kind of extraordinary affordable housing contribution embedded in the basic plan. But every single building, whether it's a commercial building or residential building, makes a substantial affordable housing contribution.
Okay. Joan? And then, John, you will have the last question.
I'm Joan Quinn. I'm interested in this business of funding structure in place for the transit plan that was mentioned. And I know there's a TIF. I'm wondering how that is working in terms of the actual funds coming in, as well as the controversy between Alexandria and Arlington over whatever's going on with this transit plan.
Well, I can answer the first part of the question, and I don't have a clue about the second part. I'm sorry. The first part, in terms of we did establish a tax increment financing district by policy, which means that as the assessed values grow, as the tax collections grow, whether they're on existing properties or they're the additional contribution for new construction, 30% of that increment goes into this fund, if you will, and the rest goes into the general fund. We anticipated paying for most of the needed infrastructure out of the cash flow represented by the annual contributions to the tax increment district. In other words, we were not planning to leverage it through bonding it necessarily, although that's an option that we have. And we don't, right now, the cash flow that came in last year, because we had a good year in terms of commercial assessments, is what we had projected. We put about $2.1 million into the fund this year, which is right on target for where we said it would be at this point in its redevelopment. Obviously, as you go through a development process where you've got some weaker years before you get to the strongest years, there will be some challenges in there, and we may end up having to leverage some of that increment financing. But it's in place, it's working, it's where we said it was going to be, and I think it's a good way of balancing off needed infrastructure on a major redevelopment project with substantial contributions to the general fund that help all Arlingtonians. You know, about 52.7% of all own source local taxes comes out of the commercial sector. You know, the commercial sector pays a lot of money into the general fund. Now that continues, and it's the upside that we're all banking on for being able to pay for the things we need to pay for beyond the basic infrastructure.
Could I just add a quick word on the aspect of the transitway, in particular the streetcar? I think it fits in with an existing concern in the Crystal City community. I mean, we are still moving towards getting the bus transitway beefed up and improved. And we hear different dates, perhaps more and more into the future, regarding the conversion to streetcar. But what we are particularly concerned about in terms of it actually one day providing some relief in terms of public transit would be, of course, precisely the issue of the collaboration with Alexandria. A milk run sort of from Pentagon City to Crystal City and to the Alexandria border is not likely to be the kind of relief we have in mind. It really should, without sort of any change to bus at the border, really take us all the way down to Old Town in some form or way.
We are now at the end, and I just want to make a comment that this committee serves a very, very vital function in the county, and if you haven't paid attention, you can see this on TV and 16, 39, 40, 69 channels. The board doesn't take a summer vacation, but our meetings do. Have a wonderful summer. Drive carefully, and God bless.